I got a
Yeah.
feeling, I don't want to get too much into this, but I think you can just pump certain information in the news and people will just, if you just tell them they have something, they're going to be like, I got it, and just die. It's not hard to believe, especially when you look at
it really isn't. Like, and it's a scary thing because like the more we sort of understand about that, the more true we see it is. That and through like Joe Dispenza's work, who's very much into that side of you are the placebo, and he goes a lot into those stories in history where someone is told they're diagnosed with something, and when they check on the autopsy, they didn't have the cancer they told they had, but why did they die? Or there was like in the You Are Placebo, he tells a story of there was someone on a trial medication where there was the antidepressant medication and there was the sugar pill, the placebo, and the guy tried to commit suicide and he took 20 of the pills and started having a full-blown, like his blood pressure plummeted, he passed out, speech was going all bad, and then they finally got him to the hospital and they brought in the doctor and they said, you're on the placebo, this isn't the antidepressant medication at all. And once they said that to him, blood pressure came back up, heart rate came down, his speech came back. So he was, again, like, he was so convinced that he'd taken all of this heavy pharmaceutical that was going to kill him that his body started responding.
As you know, I'm very into breath work, and I ran across this guy's page and we started chatting a little bit, and so we set up a little interview. I knew that Campbell and I would have a really interesting conversation, so I think you may like it too if you're interested in breath work and things like that. So check it out, and actually make sure you follow Campbell on Instagram. I'll put his Instagram handle up here or in the description. Bam, here we are. What's up, Campbell? Dude, so I met you on Instagram, and I came across your Instagram, and you had a lot of really informative content. I thought it was really good. I kind of caught myself, digging in. Even though I've been studying breathwork a good bit, I just kind of got lost in your Instagram, and I thought we would have a great conversation. So I really want to learn a lot more about you and how you got into it, and why don't we start with that? Where are you from? Where are you located?
So, where I'm from and where I'm located are two different places. I'm from a pretty small town in Australia called Cairns. It's up on the northeast coast. That's where I grew up. But my wife's from the US, the east coast of the US. So right now we're in Ocean City, New Jersey. We sort of split our time between Australia and the US. And so, it's a nice sort of, we get that both sides where it's kind of quiet and a little sleepy town in Australia, and then more of the big city and higher energy when we're here in the US.
Yeah. So you're in New Jersey, huh? How close to the big city are you?
It's like 2.5 hours to get up to New York City. But we're now down on the beach. It's really nice.
Oh, you are?
Especially here, like it's very much a summer town. Like when we come here in summer, like the beach is packed. There's like it's really, really busy, and there's no one here in winter. And so I like to do a lot of cold exposure. So we've been swimming in the ocean every day, and like there's no one around. Dude, so it's perfect.
That beats having to like go to the ice store and
the
ice, and
it's so much nicer. And just the aspect of being in nature for cold exposure is it's really interesting to me. It's like in Australia, the average temperature is probably 90 to 100 degrees where I'm from. So it's hot. So I've got like a chest freezer set up, but it's very artificial. Like you're getting into a freezer to get the cold exposure, whereas here you're getting in the ocean, like this big wide body of water, and it's just a completely different experience. And I think if anyone can get their cold exposure from a stream or a lake or the ocean, like it's completely different to getting in a cryo chamber or in a freezer or a tub full of ice, just because you get that aspect of being out in nature, which I think is so important.
Yeah, that's another thing is of course the cold exposure and ice baths. I lived out there. I was in Williamsburg for about 7 years.
All right, wow.
So I just left there about 3 years ago.
Yeah, so we were living in Brooklyn just as COVID sort of hit. We sort of came back. We got out of the city in March, almost a year ago exactly. And so we'd been living there. I was sort of I just started getting a bit of traction. I was doing weekly classes and I had workshops booked in New York to do the Wim Hof Method and breathwork. And then COVID obviously put a big screaming halt to all of that.
Yeah.
And then a year later, here we are.
Yeah. Did COVID kind of increase your practice or your motivation to get into breath work?
Yeah, it definitely made me sort of switch directions. Like I didn't do a lot of online stuff at all. I really thrive off, like I love being in person with a group of people, and you can see people have that experience. Like you see that little light bulb in their eyes of like, whoa, what was that? And also the group energy. I think it's amazing when you've got a group of people, there is some group energy that just begins to build and people feed off each other and it really elevates the experience. So when all that stopped and shifting to Zoom, to me, it took a little bit of adjusting, and it's got to the point where I'm still getting that response that I would like to get and people are having that experience, but it's removed that virtual aspect of it. I'm grateful that it's there and I've been able to reach a lot more people because the internet is huge and endless, but it does remove that sort of personal touch where you're actually there with a person and you can have that connection with them. So I think it's got its pros and its cons. It's definitely allowed me to continue teaching what I teach to probably a bigger audience, but I've had to sort of modify the way I teach a little bit just to make it more appropriate to being someone on the other side of the world. You can't give them that space of like, well, depending on where they're going with the breathwork, you don't want to push people too far. You don't want to let them sort of go to a place that you're not there to support them. And that's very hard when you've got 10 other people on a Zoom call and you're just looking at a tiny screen. So I've definitely adapted how much I put into the Zoom calls and how far I sort of take people versus when I would be with them in person.
Mm-hmm. What is your main practice? So what would you say your specialty is with breath?
It's interesting. Like I'm a physical therapist as well, and what I'm certified in, I've got a couple of certifications, but what kicked me off on this whole journey was the Wim Hof Method. I sort of came across this crazy Dutch guy that's climbing mountains in his shorts, and it's like, whoa. And so I sort of just dove into that and got all these amazing benefits and felt wonderful. And that really put me on this, like, oh, there's more here than what I previously understood. Like as a physical therapist, and I worked in respiratory wards, I worked in ICUs where my job was to go in and breathe for people on ventilators and to go in. But I noticed this huge disconnect between what I was sort of allowed or indicated to do in a hospital setting, which was get people to a certain point of functionality. And then what I was encountering with my yoga practice and with Wim Hof Method was this untapped potential of where you can take the breath. Mm-hmm. And so I was sort of like butting heads with like what I'm allowed to do in the hospital and what I know it can do. And so I sort of I call it the best rabbit hole I've ever gone down. I just started like researching all of these different forms of breath work and all of these different methodologies. So my primary tool, I guess, is the Wim Hof Method, but I've really adapted that quite a lot. The more I've understood about how it really interacts with the physiology of the body, the nervous system of the body, and that sort of energy component that's a little bit less sciencey, but I really just like to sort of teach people how to use breath as a tool. I like to split it into either functional breath work, how are we breathing for the 99% of the day, and therapeutic breath work, how do we take control of that breath for a very specific outcome. And I think they're both so important and so valid. And I think a lot of people just dive into one of those two. It's either all performance-based and nasal breathing and nitric oxide, and I really look at the sort of performance of the body, or it's the very sort of psycho-spiritual and the energetic component where it's these big peak experiences. But I think having both of those tools in the tool belt is really important. Like, how do I breathe throughout the day or for a certain outcome, or if I'm feeling a bit anxious or stressed? But also, how do I put the foot on the accelerator and have that really peak experience? If maybe I'm in a plateau or I'm a bit blocked and I need to create that wave of energy, then you need to have that tool as well. So I like to think I sort of teach across the spectrum and based on what that person's coming in with and what their goal is. I think that's a really important point, because someone coming in to improve their sleep is very different to someone coming in with trauma, or they're wanting to have an emotional release. So like, tailoring it towards each person, I think, is really important to individualize.
Yeah, that's good, dude. Because actually, one of the ideas that I had recently on my little trip that I just recently, I think that's when I had it, regardless, the point is, and you're welcome to take this idea, which you kind of already doing it, is I was going to call it like, because, you know, you got to have like a marketing thing sometimes, right? So to separate yourself.
Got to have the name. And
I'm just sharing it, even though I'm, you know, I don't know if I'm going to get to it or not, but I'm going to try to do something where it's like the all day breath or something, you know, all day breathing. Because like everything's for like, you know, high performance and, you know, sleep or this and that, but like, how are you supposed to be breathing all day? And that's one thing that I realize I say that almost every class, or I might be talking to somebody. I'm like, listen guys, this is how we're breathing just for this. Right. So, you know, but the most important thing, and what I say, I'd love to get your thoughts on it. So is, you know, nose, belly, elongate, you know, so hopefully.
Yeah. My version of that, I always say low, slow through the nose.
Oh,
which
low.
We're saying the exact same thing.
I love it. Yeah. I like
but that all like the all day breath. And again, I think people sometimes we try and run before we walk. People have heard of like breath work. Whoa. And I'm going to dive into these really like quite, not intense is the wrong word, but quite full on experiences. But that's irrelevant if your all day breathing is wrong. Like if you're breathing, and again, I don't like to use the word wrong because there's always a sort of context around it, but let's optimize or let's make efficient how we breathe all day before we dive into these sort of really high end experiences or that like high experience. Because I think in terms of like the cumulative benefit, that all day breathing is much more important. Sure, if you sit down and you do a 30 or a 60-minute breathwork session, you're going to have wonderful benefits. But if you go back and your all day breathing is non-optimal, then that other 23 hours of the day, it sort of pales in comparison. My sort of version of that, of the all day breathing, is I get people to do the breath check. And I looked up some sort of research on how many times we check our phone every day. And it's something crazy. It's most people, it's 80 to 100 times a day. We're like picking up and checking the phone. And then I put that to people. I'm like, how many times do you check your breath every day? And everyone goes, oh, 0, like not once. I'm like, well, like, see how there's that a little bit of a disconnect there?
Dude, that's really
cool. And I try and just give people an association like, hey, well, every time you check your phone, check your breath as well. Are you breathing through your nose or your mouth? Are you breathing into your chest or your belly? Are you breathing quickly or slowly? That'll take 5, maybe 10 seconds. And so there's no real excuse not to do that. It's just habit. And I really try and teach people the same, like as a physical therapist, when I teach people about posture, it's not about sitting in this like perfect posture all day. You're just going to get sore somewhere else. It's about recognizing when you're in a poor posture and fixing it. So the same way that you can't, I mean, we take 20, 25,000 breaths every day. You can't be 100% conscious of every single breath. You'll go mad. But if you recognize when you've moved into a poor respiratory
you're going
posture,
mad, or you'll elevate to a whole nother level.
you'll go into that next tier up.
Sorry.
But if you simply recognize, oh, I'm breathing poorly, like my posture is bad, and you fix that, then every time you fix it, you create that little neurological groove that becomes a habit that every time I check my breath, and soon within a couple of weeks, you check your breath and it's through your nose, it's through your belly, it's nice and slowly. Great. You've done the work, so to speak. And that's your all day breath is kind of like optimized now, but it does take a little bit of conscious effort in that first couple of weeks to like catch yourself perhaps when you're breathing non-optimally and change that. The same way that if you catch yourself slouched over your computer, you want to sit up a bit taller and drop your shoulders back. And you need to do that repeatedly before it more or less becomes automatic.
Yeah. It's really good because, you know, people need that. And I actually made a YouTube video kind of about touching on little posture and stuff like that. And because it's amazing. I mean, you probably know better than me. Can you tell us what are the chemical changes of just being slouched versus having the shoulders back?
They did it. It's such an interesting study. They did the first sort of research they did on this. They sort of like a lot of people came back and tried to like nullify the results because it wasn't done properly. So they repeated the study and you got the exact same results. Really? So what they saw is by people sort of standing in that like Superman posture of like chest out, shoulders back, really proud. And you held that for 60 seconds. And then they measured a bunch of their endocrine response. So cortisol levels, adrenaline levels. And they saw just by changing the shape of the body, standing like you were proud, puffing the chest out, shoulders back, had a measurable effect, okay, on like cortisol came down, adrenaline went up a little bit. And so it just sort of puts us into that more like ready state. And so they were sort of talking like people going into a job interview, or I had to go into a presentation, and we're sitting there all nervous, like, oh, how's this going to go? And that's creating that stress response in the body. If I can spend that 60 seconds and remind the body who's boss, like, and I can get myself sort of charged up that way, there is this effect. And I think I always like to think of breath being one of these ways that we can sort of tweak the autonomic nervous system. And there's so many other ways we can do it with our vision. Like if we're focused on one tiny little thing, we go more into that sympathetic nervous system because we're focusing on the problem. And if we think sort of evolutionarily, you want to be focusing on the tiger that's attacking you. You don't want to have this nice wide panoramic gaze. But the same way that when you're kicked back looking at the stars or like observing the ocean, the horizons, your body sort of knows nothing dangerous is happening. So that really wide gaze is one of the ways that we can tweak our nervous system. We can move from stress response to relaxation response. Our breath's a really obvious one. That sort of breathing, again, is feeding into the nervous system and saying something's wrong here. We got to run away. We're being attacked. Whereas that sends the complete opposite message. Like you don't take a long, relaxed sigh when you're being attacked by a tiger. And evolutionarily, your nervous system knows that. So it's like these little, and posture is a great one as well. Like typically when I'm curled into a ball, it's because I'm fearful, I'm in pain, I'm frightened. Okay. And when I'm standing up nice and proud, again, my body knows, all right, the environment must be conducive to me feeling okay because I'm holding myself like I am. So it's like sort of understanding, almost reverse engineering the nervous system of like, all right, I know what these triggers can do. If I stand up proud and I take a nice big breath, I lengthen the exhale, I widen my gaze, then all of that input tells the nervous system, we're okay. Right? We're not under attack. It's okay to get out of the stress response and move the nervous system into that more ready state rather than reactive state. And so I think posture, breath, vision, even our voice is an interesting one as well. Like if we're nervous and we begin to speak a little bit faster, my body knows perhaps I'm nervous. And if I can slow my voice down and speak a little bit more composed, then again, that's going to feed into the nervous system a little bit and reverse engineer and say, we must be doing okay. And I think that's really overlooked for a lot of people, like the autonomic nervous system. Yes, it's automatic, but we've got ways in. There's ways we can tweak the levers and press the buttons to give us the outcome that we want.
Yeah, I love the idea that, well, the way I explain it is, so I just think it's funny how you got different people when they're talking about yogis or they're talking about the Wim Hof. They're talking about Wim Hof or something, and they're like, he can use his mind to change his autonomic nervous system, and you're like, well, he's kind of using his mind. He's using these patterns of breathing and certain types of breathing to change his autonomic. He's not just going with his mind. So that could be something that some people might throw some people off. You're like, you think you can just think it that way, but it's like beyond thinking. It's you know.
Yeah, exactly. It's more like the physiology, the neurology, the biology of the body. Like it's not just like I'm going to think my way through this. It's like I'm going to charge up the body. I'm going to shift my own chemistry, my physiology, my nervous system through these patterns that I've developed so that I can withstand the stressor or whatever it might be. It's not simple thought alone.
Is there anything in particular that really kind of made you jump into breath work? Is there anything you can think of? Do you have any like stories about or that, or?
I think like when I sort of stumbled across the Wim Hof Method and there was this sort of array of benefits, like your sleep gets better, your energy gets better, you lose weight, and all of these things happened. Like I started the practice and I lost weight, my energy got better, my sleep got better, and I was like, wow, it does what it says it does. And so that for me was like the sort of confirming factor is like, oh, this is something I want to study more and I want to understand more. And that really just encouraged me to start researching it and looking into the mechanisms of how it works. I'm very sort of objective minded. Like I don't want to just know that it works. I want to know why that it works, because that helps me teach it as well. If I can say to someone, this is what's happening to the cell, this is what's happening to your physiology, then that helps me get that message across. So that was for me, like when I started seeing all those benefits, I was like, there's something to this and I want to know more.
Where'd you go?
Really so you go ahead, Eric.
Where'd you go? So what I mean is certain books you read, seminars you've done that you that kind of,
Yeah, facilitated that.
Plug
The
your
first one
app.
that really like put me on this was actually Dan Brule's book, Just Breathe.
Oh, no way.
If anyone hasn't read that, I think it's just a phenomenal introduction. He like gives you the wide array of all of these different breathing practices without any dogma behind them or a stigma. It's just like, this is what this one does, this is what this one does, this is what this one does. And he sort of tells that story, which for me, I was like, wow. Seeing those sort of the stories, I'm like, oh, this isn't just about, like we were talking before, it's not just about performance, or it's not just about recovery. It can be about emotional release. It can be trauma, or it can be manifestation, whatever you want to look at, whatever lens you want to look through. It's like breathing can be that additive factor. It can amplify that experience. So that book really was like, all right, I want to know more, and I want to see where this can go.
It's almost like you can't really get or be so into breath work. It's like eventually you're going to start running into the spiritual, like in a sense. You're going to start getting deeper. You're like, wait a minute, just other things are happening. It's almost hard to explain, because it's almost hard to get away from that, from developing deeper awareness, deeper states of consciousness, that kind of thing. It's almost like it's hard to separate it,
I couldn't agree more. And I often say breathwork's a gateway drug to spirituality. Like, because
that's a good one.
When you have those experiences through your breath, there's no real other explanation. Like you said, it's hard to explain, but there's something else there.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, like I had a few of those longer breathwork sessions where I was like, whoa, this is definitely different. This is a different state of consciousness, and it's not accessible to me without either exogenous, whether it be psychedelics or something like that, or endogenous, but breathwork. But it's definitely taken me to a state of mind and state of awareness that's different to my normal waking state of consciousness. Mm-hmm. And that to me was another one of those huge, like, oh, I want to know more now. Like, I want to see where that can take me, because it's such a nice state to be in.
Yeah. I'm a pretty big reader. Like, I'm kind of making up for lost time in my 20s, and or like, when I was in like high school, I was like typical, somewhat, jock, and cheated my way through school and college. So I now, over the past probably 10 years or so, I just read as much as I can, and so I'm really interested in books and stuff. So what books have you gotten into besides Dan's book, which is great, the Just Breathe?
It's so good. Well, I know you've already like put on your channel About Breath by James Nestor. Fantastic book. Like, it's one of those ones that everyone's now been like, whoa, look how relevant this is to everything. Another one I really like is Scott Carney's new book. It's called The Wedge. And it's about, so his first book, it's actually really interesting. So not his first book, sorry. He's got lots of other books. But the first book that I came across is called What Doesn't Kill Us. And he's an investigative journalist, and he went to go and debunk Wim Hof. He'd like heard of this guy promising people that they get their energy back and they'll cure their disease. And he went to like call his bluff and be like, this guy's a charlatan, and I'm going to prove to everyone.
That's good.
So he went and trained with him and was like, holy shit, this guy's onto something. Because within a couple of days, he's out hiking mountains in his shorts, and he's like losing all his body fat, and his energy's coming back. And he's like, all right, he's onto something. And that sort of put him onto this, I guess, journey, where the most recent book he released, The Wedge, is about that sort of lever to the autonomic nervous system. It's like creating space between stimulus and response. So he goes into cold exposure, he goes into breath work, he goes into hot or like sauna and these Finnish, and I think he's in Estonia, and they do these like really intense sweat baths with like herbs, and then you get into a cold river. He goes into psychedelics, but all of the ways that we can create that little wedge between stimulus and response. We can start to notice our own stress response. Like, you get in cold water and there's this like, what am I going to do? You've got an opportunity there to create this wedge between what's happening and what your reaction's going to be. And it's a really, like, he's a great writer. He takes you again on that journey of like, this is what we're discovering and this is how it's going to be. And so he's sort of like, I think there's about 5 pillars of like breath, cold, heat, psychedelics, and I think one other. But I really, really like that. And another book I'm reading at the moment is called Grow a New Body by Alberto Villoldo. He's the medical anthropologist who was sort of like in the neuroscience looking at how we create psychosomatic illness. and that if someone's sort of diagnosed with something, there is this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy often of like, this is me now, this is my life. And he's like, well, how do we create psychosomatic wellness? So he went and studied with all of the indigenous tribes in the Amazon and the shamans that basically are the medicine men and women. And he goes and discovers, again, this sort of like integration of, I guess, East and West of science and philosophy of like, what is the dietary things you can do? What is the physiological things you can do? But also incorporating that spiritual aspect. And it's really fascinating. Like, it's one of those books that I'm just like tearing through because it's really, really interesting.
That sounds great. Tell me more about that. Is that kind of related to the placebo effect? So kind of like really using your mind to think. I don't want to get too much into this, but I think you can just pump certain information in the news and people will just, if you just tell them they have something, they're going to be like, I got it, and just die. It's not hard to believe, especially when you look at
it really isn't. Like, and it's a scary thing because like the more we sort of understand about that, the more true we see it is. Mm-hmm. That and through like Joe Dispenza's work, who's very much into that side of you are the placebo, and he goes a lot into those stories in history where someone is told they're diagnosed with something, and when they check on the autopsy, they didn't have the cancer they told they had, but why did they die? Or there was, like, in the You Are Placebo, he tells a story of there was someone on a trial medication where there was the antidepressant medication and there was the sugar pill, the placebo, and the guy tried to commit suicide and he took 20 of the pills and started having a full-blown, like his blood pressure plummeted, he passed out, speech was going all bad, and then they finally got him to the hospital and they brought in the doctor and they said, you're on the placebo, this isn't the antidepressant medication at all. And once they said that to him, blood pressure came back up, heart rate came down, his speech came back. So he was, again, like, he was so convinced that he'd taken all of this heavy pharmaceutical that was going to kill him that his body started responding. So it's crazy to think that I always point out, like, that's on the sort of pointy end of the spectrum of like when it's really at that full end. But
I love how I really like a lot of the terms you're using, like the pointy end of the spectrum. I love
because
that.
Yeah, and it's like, it's sometimes like that example for people is like, oh, well, that's really far away, or that's very
extreme.
Different.
Yeah.
It's very extreme, exactly. But that doesn't mean that a diluted version of that's still occurring all day, every day. So like, I'm a big fan of like the way that Joe Dispenza talks about a lot of these practices. And again, I think it's interesting the language that we use, that I've encountered some people in workshops or classes that, depending on the language you use, really dictates their engagement. If I start talking about chakras and energy and the spiritual, people just like that's not for me. And you can see them like, oh, now, and all of a sudden they're out. Whereas if I'd said, this is going to shift the chemistry of your body, your nervous system is going to move between the autonomic states, and this is what's going to happen to the pressure in the body, then they're like, oh yeah, I get that. Like, I'll engage. So I think it's really interesting that based on the language that you're comfortable with will sort of dictate how willing you are to believe what's going to happen. And I think that's just a really fascinating facet of our mind and the effect of our mind. If you believe something's going to happen or someone's told you it's going to happen, like the old doctor in the white lab coat is very authoritarian of like, hey, this is what's going to happen. Then you're like, okay, yes, it is, because the person in power has told me how it's going to be. But we also need to recognize our own role in that. Like, can I have that position of power within myself and be like, I'm going to feel better. This is what's going to happen for me, instead of waiting for someone else to tell us that.
Yeah. I have that book, You Are the Placebo, sitting on my, it's in my to be read stack, which is growing every day. I have like 3 books coming in the mail. I'm like, oh my God. I'm just like, I always want to have, I got too much, but
I'm the same.
One of the things I have coming in the mail is the primordial breath. It's like Taoist breathing.
Cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know a little bit about it, but basically, in the long run, it just really comes down to long, slow, and deep, and almost effortless. Just, that's one of the things I do in my yoga and a lot of my meditations is I just do like an elongated breath and try and make people sit there and breathe as effortless as possible and try and stretch it out. I mean, I only push them to like 12 seconds in and 12 seconds out, which brings me to one of your little 1 minute techniques. Pretty awesome. Like, I love those kinds of things where you you just increase by a second.
Yeah.
And another guy that I train the Wim Hof method with a good bit is Breath Fitness, Lucas
Miles
Miles.
Lucas.
Yeah. So I've done a lot of his courses and got to know him pretty well through there. And he has that box breathing one where it's like it increases box breathing 1 second.
Yeah, it gets a little bit bigger.
Yeah, I love that.
I really like box breathing has become quite popularized and for good reason. Like it's very simple. You don't need a lot of know-how. It's not a lot of technical stuff. But what I love about it is, like you described, like it's pretty adaptable. You can do a really small box, maybe a 4-second side, and you can have that as a background. Like I'm typing away at emails or I'm doing something where I just want to have this background optimal breath. But then I can stretch that to a 10-second side. And then it's a really engaging, like I'm stretching my physiology. It requires a lot of control. And based on where you are at that day or what outcome you want, you can just adapt the size of the box. So it's really flexible. I really like to incorporate that when I'm walking. So I like breathe in for 5 or 6 steps, hold for 5 or 6 steps. Nice, huh?
That's also a Joe Dispenza thing. I was doing it before I read about Joe. Like Joe talks about that too, doing the walking. And I think he talks about like walking yourself into a new reality. You're just, as you're walking, you're feeling those feelings of where you want to be. And I started doing his work, probably back in 2017. And like when Becoming Supernatural came out, that's where it started getting in the mind. I wasn't like as disciplined to do it daily, but I've done it more and more, and definitely it's pretty crazy. Like
Yeah.
2 years ago, I was working for somebody else, and I left, and it was miserable. It was like, it's hard to believe like that somebody would come in and say, "Yo, you have improved our business. You have done better work than anybody's ever done, and you get it done quicker than everybody. This is great," And then they walk in and treat you as if none of that was true every day. Like talk to you as if you're going to be late on your project when you have no evidence of ever being late on any projects, but they talk to you as if you're going to be. And I'm just like, I don't understand why you got to talk to me like this, And this is like a good example of like how crazy it is to work for somebody else. At the same time, you are dealing with other people's issues. That's really them.
Yeah.
Really their issues. But it just felt like a toxic environment. So I swore to never work for anyone ever again. And I haven't worked for anybody ever since. So
Awesome.
I've been working for myself. So very happy and proud to be there. But of course, there's always another level. I'm still trying to.
There always is that, like, but again, I think so many people don't recognize, like, you had that foresight of like, this isn't a great environment, the way I'm being treated, or someone else's if it's their own shit, but it's still they're putting it on me. Like I think a lot of people are stuck, maybe not stuck, but are in that situation, and it's too difficult, or it's too scary, or it's too uncertain to like create that different, right? Well, I don't like where I work now, but what else am I going to do? Like, that's kind of scary. And that it does take a lot of like stepping into that unknown, as Joe Dispenza talks about, is pretty intense. Like you've got to have that sort of trust, and you've got to do it. But for a lot of people, it's easier to stay where you are. It's easy to be like, oh, well, it does suck, but at least I've got a job, so I'll just stay here and deal with it, which I think is unfortunate. Like, I don't think anyone should. It would be ideal if you didn't have to go to work and hate your job.
Yeah. No, people need to understand that, like, it always works out. And that's one of the things I like to point out to people is realizing how many times or how long we've stressed out about bullshit that never happened. You know what I'm saying? Like, I could probably think of a ton of them that I just did yesterday or the day before. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, you might stress for like months about maybe the economy's crashing or something, anything crazy. And then
really anything.
We never remind ourselves of how much time we spent stressing and this crap never happened, like 2012, the world was going to end. I mean, people were stressing and then it all worked out. Anyway, but
it always does. You're right.
All I want to say is, I don't want to get too spiritual or weird, but God, infinite intelligence, the world, the earth provides for us, and we have to learn to kind of accept it and know that it's going to happen, because that wasn't the first time. But whenever I did that, I didn't really have much of a plan. you know, like I just jumped and hope that the net will appear. You know?
Yeah. Which I think like, and like I always point to, I teach that sort of principle. I really like to encourage people to recognize that. Like, how many times do you stress about that presentation or that deadline or that thing you have to do, and you work yourself up weeks before, and it's never as bad as you thought it was going to be, ever. Like, you get through it. Like, even if it was a bit uncomfortable, you get through it and you're like, oh, there's that feeling of like, oh, that wasn't as bad as I thought.
Yeah.
And whenever I have workshops and I'm doing an ice bath, like I ask people to start, like, how are you feeling about getting in that 32-degree water in 45 minutes? And they're like, I'm going to die. It's terrible. And I'm like, this is the same thing. So like, what you're creating is you're talking yourself into the worst possible outcome. It's something our brain does. Right? And even if we think like evolutionarily, that's a survival mechanism. We want to prepare for the worst. Because if we're just always looking for the best thing, like we might miss the tiger or whatever it might be. So like, when that mental part of our brain wants to find where's the worst possible outcome, and we fixate on that. And so like at the start of a workshop, I can see people like nervous and there's like trepidation in the air of like, oh, how's the ice bath going to go? It's going to be horrible. What? I don't think I can do it. And I have people call me on the morning of the workshop. Hey, just letting you know, I'm just coming for the breathing. I'm not doing the ice bath. I'm like, that's fine. Like it's not obligated. Like it's an opportunity, but I guarantee that if you do it, you'll have a different experience than you think you're going to have. And again, that having that sort of time of preparing your mind, preparing your body, like stepping into that willfully, jumping off and waiting for the net to catch you. And you get out the other side and you're like, woo, I feel really good. Like, this is not what I expected it to be. It wasn't as hard as I thought. And you're like, wow, like how many other things in your life are you thinking that's going to be terrible? This is going to be really hard. I don't know how I'm going to get through that. And on the other side, you always get through it. And so it's like training that part of our brain to be like, oh, I'm doing that thing where I project it's going to be really bad. And experience has taught me that it probably won't be as bad.
I love that. Dude, I love how you say, I saw one of your posts that said, you know, it's the ultimate of surrendering and letting go. And that's what I tell people. I mean, actually, I don't know if you see it on, if it's not really very prominent on my Instagram, but every Sunday I host a ice bath at the UFC gym here. There's a core UFC gym where I do jiu-jitsu, and and it's pretty crazy. That was another thing is about that is it's almost like a simple principle of life. It's almost like nothing good comes out of unless there's work or facing some sort of fear or facing some sort of pain. It's almost like it's kind of hard to understand that. So for some people, I think that think that we deserve and we're supposed to just get everything. Well, there's a balance. I don't know. Yeah, we're that's a tough one to really get into.
It's hard to unpack, but I completely agree. Like, it's quite often after the hard thing that the good thing comes, or like that. Oh, well, I do need to step into the discomfort to achieve what I want on the other side. Like, if I just stay back here in the comfort zone, I'm never going to get what I want.
Yeah. Resistance is the way. So wherever you're having this sort of resistance, usually you want to go head first into that.
Yeah, towards that.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Cool, man. Oh yeah. So what's the? I got to tell you, have you gotten into more like holotropic breath work or anything like that?
I've never done it, like one of the really long, like the holotropic sessions that are like 2-3 hours. I've never done. The closest I've done, there's this 3-part breath. I think the original sort of teacher of it is someone called David Elliott. But I work with a studio here in New York that a lot of their teachers have gone either through him or one of his sort of teachers. But it's this sort of like where it's like into the belly, into the chest, out. And it's quite sort of like continuous and rapid. And that gives me, it's much more of a, like, I guess, intense, for lack of a better word. But it sort of takes me to the same place. Whenever I've done a shorter session of a holotropic style breath, like a continuous, ongoing, fast, intense, like, and you get the sort of buzzing and maybe you get a bit of the cramps and it gets a little bit elevated. Like, it takes me to that same place, but a little bit more gentle. So it's a really interesting practice that I'd not come across until I did it. And I was like, whoa, it like blasted me off to the same place that if I do a really like deep session, I'm like, oh, this took me there as well. But I just found with like holotropic, especially whenever I encounter people that if that was their first foray into breath work, it generally wasn't a great experience, because it's like you're going from 0 to 100 like that. Yeah. And if you don't know, if the facilitator isn't there to be like, this is what's going to happen, you're going to feel quite anxious in your body. There's going to be lots of energy moving. And if you don't know that that's coming, and if you haven't prepared, and maybe you've had things in your past life that maybe are going to come up, like, it's really important that the facilitator is facilitating well. And every time I had someone come to a workshop, it's like, oh, I did a holotropic session as my first sort of thing, and I don't want to do it again because it was so intense. And so I think it's not should be reserved for, but like having a bit of a taste of different breathwork experiences and be like, oh, this is what happens in my body. This is what happens in my mind. This is what happens emotionally. So when I turn that up to 10, what's going to happen? Rather than just being like, oh, I've got no experience and let's jump into a 2-hour session. And it's like, I would make that akin to someone perhaps doing like a psychedelic that maybe wasn't prepared for it, or wasn't facilitated in the right way. And it doesn't necessarily, it's not always going to be a good outcome. Just because it's a practice with good intention, you can do it the wrong way. Like, you jump into that and you breathe with that intensity for that long a time, you can sort of stretch some of those boundaries a little bit. So I think it should be taken with a bit of caution, or at least understanding, and understanding that you're driving the bus. Right. So if at any point, stop breathing, come back to your normal breath. If it's getting way too intense, you don't have to drive yourself off that cliff. That's one thing I really love to instruct people is like, I can't feel what you're feeling. Only you can. So, is it taking you to somewhere lovely and blissful and spiritual and centered? Or is it taking you somewhere that you don't want to go? And you don't have to keep breathing your way closer and closer to that point. And I'm starting to create resistance in my body, but the instructor's saying to keep breathing, so I keep breathing. So like letting people know, hey, at any point, you can just come back to your normal breath. You don't have to push harder and faster and stronger. So understanding that it is the breath that's driving that. And I in every class I do, I was like, this is the mantra, is breathe normally to feel normal, right? So if at any point it's a bit too much or you don't like it, breathe normally, feel normal, right? Those sensations are going to dissipate quite quickly. So I always want people to have the safety break where it's like, all right, maybe not today, or I'm not feeling in the right state of mind to go there. I'm going to breathe a little bit slower. I'm going to regulate the intensity of what's happening, rather than it just feels like I'm being driven to somewhere perhaps that I'm not ready to go.
Yeah. You might appreciate, are you familiar with the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and the levels of self-progression, or I forgot the name, or self-development? Basically, it's like the yamas and the niyamas, which is basically be a good person but also learning to kind of like separate your mind from your body, or realizing you are not your mind and your feelings. You're separate. You're the awareness of that. So having that understanding first, and then it gets to asanas, where you develop the body so it's ready basically for the amount of energy that you're going to get from the next step, which is pranayama, which is all breath work. And then you get into meditation. I think that's a really important, I think it's a very powerful progression to go through, especially, to make sure you're prepared for it. Because I have witnessed and experienced people that did more powerful breathing, like rebirthing is what we just did on the in this recent workshop or retreat that I did for 21 days with Dan Brule. Some people, I think, just were in their head too much and not really paying attention to their feelings. And I mean, that happens with a lot of things too. But when you get into the rebirthing, which was a big eye opener for me, especially practicing it over, we had days off. So it was a 21-day retreat, but we only trained, 15 days. And some days we did rebirthing twice a day. So it was a powerful, transformative experience. And it sounds like, I mean, I was kind of like you, or I don't know. I'm not. It sounds like you have some experience with holotropic and whatnot, and it's somewhat similar. It's just the breath is going to be a little bit different, but it was some powerful stuff, and I wasn't aware of it as much. I mean, I knew about it, and I had tried holotropic and things like that before, but and you'll see in my interview with Dan where I ask him about this, I basically start off by saying, so you trained with yogis and all these different powerful breath workers, over the past 45 years. And I was like, and somehow we basically only focused on rebirthing the whole time. And then he goes into why, and you're just
all right.
oh, you're like, this is powerful stuff. On a brief explanation would be, and which is what we're doing in yoga and a lot of different things. And I think we're doing it very much on a subtle level, doing the Wim Hof method by stimulating that sympathetic nervous system. It's remembering old and past traumas. So that's why people start having emotional releases, but people start crying, and some people laugh. I mean, if you didn't know what was going on at this place, you walk in on the farm and
these people are crazy.
Off in the distance, there's like people screaming, and then over here somebody's crying. You'd be like, what is going on? But I mean, my experience was pretty profound a couple times, and especially when I had these certain releases, like I didn't like cry screaming out loud. I did have tears coming out of my eyes a lot at a few times, but I felt it specifically in different chakra or energy centers, and one of the sitter for me could visibly see my solar plexus just pulsing, and just that space. Like, how do you explain that? What is going on? And while that was happening, I was experiencing, like, it was as if I was facing some of the deepest fears, which I don't even know what it is. I mean, probably fear of snakes. Hopefully it's fear of snakes. We'll see. If I'm not scared of snakes anymore, that'd be amazing. I'm partially joking, those who I'm not completely serious. But yeah, it was crazy. And whatever you're feeling, that's the most important thing, is like to not think and to really feel, and to whatever you're feeling, you go into that feeling with the breath. And it's basically a pretty strong inhale and a relax. So, I mean, we did that all the time. So the most important breath that he uses, and he's doing it through the mouth. You can do it through the nose. He says it just takes longer to get where you want to get, but I'm a big nose breather, especially after reading Breath and reading The Oxygen Advantage. They both kind of really emphasize the nose breathing.
Hammer away at that.
Yeah. So, but, so I let go and did a little bit of mouth breathing. But in general, the breath is just and then you want to keep that. And it's the most importantly, and this, so just the body knows that type of breath is kind of a stress response, and then is a relax and letting go. So you're constantly letting go and just trying to let go deeper, but at the same time you're increasing your sympathetic nervous system. And that's what I asked him about, and he kind of confirmed. He was like, yeah, so your body's basically remembering all these old traumas, and you don't even have to know what it is. But afterwards, after I had crying or breathing through this fear, it was almost like, I mean, they should call it reborn. I think that's what they mean to by the name rebirthing. They just didn't want to say reborn. I don't know. But you do feel like a whole new person. I feel like I feel more connected to everything all the time. We'll see if it fades. Talk to me in a few weeks or something. But
and what sort of timeline? Are you doing that continuously for 30, 60, 90 minutes?
About an hour.
About an hour.
I mean,
any breath? Do you do any retentions or breath holds, or you keep that breath going nonstop?
I did on my own a few times just because I enjoy it, because I like doing those breath holds. But for the most part, no, you're not really supposed to. Ideally, I'm not an expert, but 20 minutes or so, you're doing it fairly hard. I mean, you're inhaling to about, if 10 was the deepest full, you're inhaling like 8.5. And that was Dan's big thing, man. Like, he would just sit in front of the class and just be like,
yeah,
releasing, and that's really what the world needs, right? So everybody's just so tense.
The world needs that collective sigh of relief.
sigh of relief.
But it's so like I'm working through Dan's breath mastery program at the moment, and like he lives what he preaches. I love like he walks his talk. He's sitting there talking. You just watch him.
Yeah.
Like he lets out these like obvious full body sighs and he's so unashamed. Like, and he's like, and everyone asks me like, why are you sighing like that? He's just like, like, there's no like, oh, I'm sorry if you feel uncomfortable by me breathing like this. Like, I'm looking after me. Yeah. And you watch him throughout the entire course, and you just see him like,
yeah.
Like, and I think it's he's not just like preaching this idea. You can see he truly lives it. Like, it's really nice to see that he's very much embodying the practice that he teaches.
Yeah, yeah. It was one hell of an experience for us. I mean, not only did we live in nature, I walked around barefoot a good bit, and I never was like totally into grounding and barefoot, but I did feel like different, like inflammation in my body felt less, but I was also doing a lot of breath work too, so who knows. But we were eating mostly organic veggies, and we had an organic and veggie cook. Like, they cooked meals for us every day, and it was a great, amazing experience. And not to mention, we get really tight and really connected to the people who we train with. So
yeah, that to me was like when I did the Wim Hof training. Like, so you did 2 days at Wim's house.
You're a certified Wim Hof instructor. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Where'd you do that?
So you do 2 days at Wim's house in the Netherlands, a little town called Ghent, I think it is. And then about 8-10 months later, you do 6 days in Poland at his like retreat facility, where that involves like you go and climb the mountain in your shorts. And it was but to me, what I came away, like, it was this incredible experience, but just the tight knit, like there's 45 people there from 20 different countries. Everyone came there with a different story. Like, some people were trying to heal trauma, others were doctors that were like looking for didn't matter what the story was, but the bond that like you're just with these people in these really intense situations, whether it be through breath or going sitting in the frozen stream, like you had to forge this like, all right, we're in this together. And like coming out of that, it was the community aspect that I was like, that was the most profound thing. Like, I learned so much about breathing and about training and looking at people's areas of resistance stuff, but what I really took away was like the power of just like the group and like one in, all in sort of thing. Like, the last day is you do this sort of 6-hour hike up to Mount Śnieżka, which is on the border of Poland and the Czech Republic, and it was minus 15 Celsius. I don't know what it is in Fahrenheit, but freezing. But the whole time it was like, if not every single one of us is getting up to the top, none of us are. So there's no individual goal here of I'm going to get up. It's like, if we don't all get up together, none of us are getting up. Like, this is, the group goes together. And having that sense of like having your back sort of thing was just a really powerful thing. And
yeah, that is powerful.
And I see that in the workshops that I do. Once everyone's jumped into that ice bath, they get out, you all face the same fear. You walk through the same fire, and you come out the other side like, bang, we did that together, and there hugs, and like, there's just that sense of camaraderie and like connection of like, we both faced a pretty profound fear, and like ice cold water is an ingrained, like your body knows it's a pretty dangerous thing. So like there is this like internal sense of like, oh, and once everyone gets through that and gets the other side and they're cheering each other on, and you see people just make this bond in one day of like, wow, like having that, yeah, that group connection, I think is so not overlooked, but I just saw it as so profound. And it seems like you probably had the same experience over that 21 days. You're with those people all day, every day, and you're going through some pretty heavy experiences with breath. Like, stuff comes up, emotions come up, you're vulnerable in front of these people. So I think it's a really big piece of why I think breathwork, another sort of added benefit is like, you get to share that side of yourself, and you get to be seen by someone else in that perhaps vulnerable state. And I think that's really important for as a human to like be seen and be heard, and also to provide that support for someone that maybe you can see is in a tough situation.
Yeah, man, that's great. And you're making me think of the saying, water rises to its own level. So, you know, the students are always going to be catching up. You know, so it's like you almost we're always got to stay on top as a yoga teacher and as a breathwork teacher. And I'm trying to get the yoga community, because you'd be amazed. Like, let's say the yoga studio that I teach at now, I never actually wanted to be a yoga teacher, but I kind of took the training at, right at the end of 2019. And then, and then I was also practicing the Wim Hof Method, and I started doing more courses online with people. And then, then I started incorporating it into my practice. So originally I would start with the Wim Hof Method, then we do yoga. So it'd be like, I called it like Tumo Flow or something,
Yeah,
and,
nice.
But since then I've changed it around, and we do the asanas first, then the pranayama for like 10 minutes, and then meditation for 10, or 20, depending on, hour or hour and a half class. What I was getting at was, so breath work is the new yoga, right? So more people have like taken on this, and Dan said this, and I'd heard it before. I wasn't sure if it was from him or not, but point is that it's like not as popular as yoga. It's like the next step. Oh my God, I'm just having this realization. It's almost like humanity in general is following Patanjali's,
those
our
asanas,
asanas. We got our asanas and our bodies ready. And now
the world's moving into pranayama.
Take on the intense breathing and meditation. But what I was getting at was, that teaching people, I was really mind blown, and it wasn't only the yoga studio that I'm at now, but I'd walk into many yoga studios and be like, yo, do y'all do breath work, or are you familiar with the Wim Hof Method? And they were always like, what is that? And I felt, I don't know, part of me is being judgmental. I'm like, what are you guys not keeping up on shit? But it's good to be able to do that. And what's funny is, I only taught at this UFC gym that I train at, and my friend's an owner, and he was like, I'm thinking about doing yoga. And I was like, are you saying that because I just did class? He didn't even know. He was like, he goes, you're trained? He's like, Eric, why don't you just teach yoga for me? And I'm like, all right, I'll try it. And I just started, and that's when I did my Tumo Flow, right? And then I'd lost touch with a lot of the yoga friends. I didn't really have many yogis in my life at the time, and so I went over to this yoga studio, and I was like at Leela, and I was like, hey guys, I was like, I want to show you guys, I need somebody to come and critique me, right? I want you to give me an idea what's happening. Brittany, the owner, showed up one day. I didn't even know she was the owner at the time. I was just like, somebody came from the other studio, cool. And I was teaching her, and at the end she goes, that was legit. And I was like, that's about the best compliment I could get, right? Like, I don't think anything better you could say. And she's like, I want you to teach my pranayama class. And I was like, okay. I hadn't really done much pranayama, but after researching, I was like, yes. So it's just breath work, breath work and meditation. It's just kind of, yeah.
It really, like, I have the exact same thing where I like approach people or studios or gyms and like, hey, do you know what the Wim Hof Method is? And some people are like, yeah, of course, we'll be really, and others like, the what? Like, no, I never heard of it. I'm like, do you know what breathwork is? They're like, no, what? And I'm like, it's just interesting to me. Like there's becoming more and more exposure to these sort of practices, but you still find these, well, not even little pockets, but big areas of just like, no, never heard of it. And I find that to me is really encouraging.
It is,
because they haven't yet noticed the potential of it. Like, and once they do this, and I really like, maybe this is a gross oversimplification, but like, I haven't really come across anyone that hasn't found benefit in these practices. Like, you teach breathwork and they're like, whoa. And whether it was, I feel more energized, or I feel more calm, or I'm less anxious, or my sleep's better, whatever the benefit might be, it's really hard to find someone that doesn't get some benefit out of it. So I think it's encouraging that there's those like pockets that haven't yet been introduced to some of these practices.
True, man. And what Dan's critique was of yogis is that yogis are too strict and too stuck in their lineage, and they don't want to break their pattern or interrupt it anyway. And I found that in in different yogis I've met in the past. You're like, well, we do 30 breaths and then hold. And you're like, well, I'm doing 60. I'm sorry.
I'm adding my flavor to it.
Hey, and that's actually what I do. I would call my specialty, my own little practice that I created. It's not much. I mean, it's not like I created it. I just combined, some of Joe Dispenza's ideas and works with the Wim Hof method. So I do in my pranayama classes. I'm actually changing it up. I'm starting to do a little more of this, that breath, that rebirthing breath. I did that yesterday with a meditation class, and everybody had kind of profound experiences. So I'll probably experiment with that more. But more recently, it's just been, I do like 30 with breath hold. Well, I do a hold and then an exhale hold and pulling the belly in, kind of the bundas, like squeeze the diaphragm in. And then while you're doing that, I'm trying to instruct people to if they're open to it, get them aware they're like perineum, and squeeze the perineum and kind of work your energy up to the third eye. So helping people be more aware of that energy and how to use it and direct it. So that's what I do. I do 30, 60, 90. And in the holds, I try and incorporate the bandhas. And then after that, we kind of go into like some meditation where I do a lot of balanced breath, really just a lot of just trying to elongate and use that diaphragm. But also...
And it's amazing. Like I do something very similar. And I think it's important. I often remind myself and people, it's like, and Wim is the first person to say, he's like, I didn't make this up. This is right? Tumo. This is like pranayama. It's 5,000 years old. So like anyone that says like, I made this up, you didn't. You repackaged it, or you recreated it, or you tweaked it. Like there's all these new iterations, but nothing's really new. And I thought that was very like, when Wim said that, I'm like, oh, I like that he's not like, this is my technique. It's just that like I've repackaged something like, and it's mainly around tumo, and then involving the cold exposure, but stripping away a lot of the dogma. Like if you look into learning tumo, it's very hard to find a teacher that's willing to give you all the information. You've got to go to Tibet, or like it's quite restrictive, and they want to keep their teachings within that lineage. And same as some of the schools of yoga and other schools of pranayama, like there is this continue the lineage, so to speak, and it's not just for everyone. But Wim's idea is just like that, like everyone should have access to these tools. Like if it makes you feel good, you should do it. Like it shouldn't be restricted that you can't go meditate in a cave for a week to learn all these practices.
That's what
all those little tweaks and like making your own version of it, I think is like awesome. Like I do the exact same thing. I don't do 3 rounds of 30 breaths with 1 minute hold. Like I start to like I don't like the rigid structure behind that. Like breathe until you feel a bit different, and then let's do an exhale hold, let's do an inhale hold, let's do a second exhale hold. Like go with the flow, follow the body. Yeah.
So dude, this is awesome. I'm trying to think, is there anything else you want to go over before we
I always just like to leave people with an invitation, like people that haven't tried breathwork, like there's so many flavors or colors in the palette, and like we sort of touched on at the start, that all day breath is probably where you should start. Like notice how you're breathing. I always like to leave it with like, doesn't matter what tools you have if you don't know when to implement them. You can have all of these different practices, but if you don't know when to do them, if you don't notice when you're becoming anxious or when you're starting to breathe a little bit faster or shallower, then they're kind of useless. So I always, people, if they're like, where do I get started, is just start noticing your breath. Like how do you breathe throughout the day? How do you breathe when you're in a meeting? How do you breathe when you're on a phone call? Like all those different things will start to show you where you can start to make little tweaks and to get all these benefits, perhaps before you dive into a very specific practice, like learn to walk before you run. So I think that's a nice place to just invite people to start noticing how they breathe and how they feel. And is there a difference when they breathe a different way? Do they feel a different way? Because quite often there's a little bit of an insight there, like, oh, I breathe different when I'm super content and relaxed than I do when I feel anxious. How interesting. And that's a nice little buy-in of like, I wonder what else that might be able to tell me if I start to change it for the better.
Yeah, that's great. So you do teach online?
Yeah, so I do a variety of classes through mainly studios in New York. I also do one-on-ones and sort of package sessions. And I incorporate all of these different sort of methods that we've touched on to just give people that nice, well-rounded experience.
That's cool. I would love to either try one of your classes or just, I'll check it out. I have to look at. Do you have a website? What's your website?
Yeah, website's breathbodytherapy.com. I've also got a 5-week sort of online course up there as well, but I've just sort of taken again a lot of these principles and brought it back to principles rather than methods. How does it work with the nervous system? How does it work with your physiology? What's the best biomechanics to be breathing? So some of my sort of physio knowledge infiltrated into the sort of breath work. It's a great place for people to start of like, all right, well, how do I optimize my breathing, or how do I improve my breathing to get started with some of these practices?
That's cool. Well, I'm trying to put one together myself, and I call it Breath is the Way. So,
yeah, nice.
But I mean, my idea is like, I'm a photographer mainly and videographer. So my idea is like what I aspire to do is to travel and interview all these different pioneers in the self-help world, in the just the evolution, always trying to find out new practices. So what I want my practice to be, and this is the first time expressing it, is like just an evolving practice where you can just practice with me in the morning and in the evening. Or, I mean, I was hoping to have other teachers as well, but because I won't be able to do that every time, but just at least have like a morning and evening, and more of like an accountability thing. So you have a membership and you have somewhere to show up to every morning or every evening,
Yeah, I've started actually, that just sort of, I do on a Wednesday night. So tonight it'll be 6 p.m. your time. But I call it the breath sessions, where it's just a free or donation-based class on Zoom. The link's just in my Instagram bio. But every week, I call it the exploration of breath. There's no rigid structure of this is the technique, but we explore a different practice each week. And again, it's just that, it's free.
All right.
And just that place for people to have that opportunity to like check in and just breathe a certain way and have that, accountability and that option to just dive into a practice without much know-how or with technique.
So that's what time? 6 p.m. New York
6
time?
p.m. 7 p.m. New York time.
7.
So I think it'll be 6 p.m. in Central time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 7 p.m. Eastern.
Oh, you were already correcting it for me. I see. No, I got jujitsu tonight. I was gonna make it if it was 5 p.m. my time.
Oh, damn.
Man.
Well, one time down the line for sure.
Yeah. So it's always Wednesdays.
Yeah, Wednesdays 7 Eastern.
All right. Well, cool, dude. This was great. Really appreciate
Yeah, it's a good chat, man. We kicked an hour really quickly.
I know, right? That was quick. I didn't even realize we went through that time so quickly. But maybe we'll do it again sometime. I'd love to chat again. I'll keep up with you on Instagram and whatnot. This is a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I am always down to just vibe out about all things breath and all things life and spirituality and all the things we covered.
Yeah, man, that was great. Hopefully I'll come to New York soon. I actually had a friend from New York that was in our group. So
yeah, was it Viv?
Yes, Viv.
So Frequency that I was talking about before, where I do breathwork sessions, she's one of the co-founders. It's her. Yeah, it's awesome. Honestly, when they get back up. So I had this idea when I was in Australia. I was doing breathing. I was like, wouldn't it be amazing to incorporate this audio visual thing where you could breathe and have this thing? And I got to New York City and someone was like, hey man, you got to check out this place. It's called the Frequency Dome. So it's tucked away in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, I think, where you go in and they've constructed this big 12-foot dome, and they've got 6 projectors down the bottom that shoot up. So you lay on the floor and do breath work, and they're projecting you flying through the cosmos, or you're in a forest, fractals and stuff. And it was so epic. I was like, holy shit. And then obviously COVID hit, so the dome is closed, but they've really shifted to an online platform where they've got so many different varieties on there. I do Wim Hof Method style. There's that 3-part breath. Someone does box breathing. There's pranayama. It's a really nice one-stop shop for breathing.
So that's Vivian's thing, the dome?
Yeah. So it's called Frequency Mind.
I think she said I remember seeing Frequency Mind somewhere, but I don't know if she explained about that dome, but that's great. She and I connected really well right from the beginning. I really love her.
Yeah, she's lovely.
Yeah, she was great.
So check out Frequency. It's really cool.
Actually,
sorry, you go.
I did a post on my Instagram. So if you see the picture where it has a breath symbol, and then if you swipe, you'll see a picture of Vivian in there.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I thought I saw, I wasn't sure that she'd gone down, but I'd seen different people posting about the retreat. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that's Viv.
Oh, man. Yeah. So cool. Dude, thanks again.
This was my pleasure.
We'll talk
again soon.
Sometime soon. Have a great day.
You too, Eric.
All right. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, all those things. And we'll see you in the next episode.